They come from the bowels of hell.
The Dana Gould Hour.
Jungle worms and swamp rats run around your feet.
I bought a dog that killed the calf that ate the canary. What is truth?
And once again, welcome back.
Hey everybody, this is a special little bonus thing we put together for you. Like a lot of people who listen to this podcast, I was pretty moved by the passing of film director David Lynch this past January. More than I thought it would be, to be honest. I think a lot of it had to do with the timing. I mean, he was such an intrinsic part of Los Angeles. He made movies set here. He did a daily weather report for the city. In his interviews, he spoke at length about how much he loved the light here, the feeling of old Hollywood, the smell of night-blooming jasmine in the air. And he left the city just as it was literally burning down around us. On top of that, we were 4 days away from a new president who was the embodiment of everything that David Lynch is not. It was like Dale Cooper died 4 days before Bob became president. And just when things couldn't get worse, reality said, wait, I got one more. So while struggling to fight the fires with thousands of people in the Pacific Palisades and Altadena losing everything, the city was now mourning the passing of its coolest resident. And if you don't live here, I really can't understate what a presence he is. There's a rotating sculpture of his head in Santa Monica. People gathered at the Bob's Big Boy in Toluca Lake, where he used to go famously every day at 2 for coffee and a chocolate shake. The statue of Bob's became an impromptu shrine. People gathered at Jumbo's Clown Room, the Hollywood Boulevard strip joint where, as legend has it, he wrote Blue Velvet. Every sidewalk sandwich board in town bore a chalk drawing of his iconic pompadour. So, as I began the next podcast, I figured I would dedicate the True Tales from Weirdsville segment to Mr. Lynch, but it quickly became apparent that it was way too much story for just one episode, and it quickly stretched over 3. And so, for your listening pleasure, we have stitched them together, and here they are. Enjoy.
They're true tales from Weirdsville. Tales from Weirdsville. And they're true.
Can your heart stand the shocking facts?
If you were cool and groovy in the late 70s and early 80s, you loved the movie Eraserhead. Now, one such person was Stuart Cornfeld. Stuart Cornfeld attended the AFI, the American Film Institute, and while he was there, he met a fellow student named Anne Bancroft. Yes, that Anne Bancroft. Anne Bancroft, who was already a very well-established movie star. She'd already been nominated for Best Actress 5 times. She won for The Miracle Worker. But Anne wanted to direct a movie, so she took classes at the AFI. And there she met Stuart and ended up asking him to produce her directorial effort, her first and only, the 1980 film Fatso, starring Dom DeLuise. It sounds like a comedy, but it isn't really. It's a comedy drama, and it has a big heart. It's an underrated film. It's incredibly sweet. Bancroft then introduced Stuart to her husband, Mel Brooks, and Mel asked Stuart to come on board to help produce his film, History of the World Part 1. Stuart ended up going to work full-time at Mel's production company, Brooks Films. And although Brooks is one of the most accessible, user-friendly filmmakers on the face of the earth, when it came to the films that he produced, films that were not Mel Brooks movies per se, he was unafraid to take artistic risks if he believed the payoff would be worth it. To that end, Brooks and Cornfeld made a great pair. Cornfeld also knew what regular people liked, but he was also eyeball deep in the art world and the avant-garde. His wife, Johanna Wendt, was a celebrated performance artist and seminal figure in the late 70s, early 80s LA punk scene. Long story longer, Stewart loved Eraserhead, and so he set up a meeting with Lynch and then introduced Lynch to Mel Brooks. Brooks Films had the rights to The Elephant Man, at the time a hit Broadway play based on the true story of John Merrick, who was, you know, the Elephant Man.
I expected to meet a young Max Reinhardt. I expected the guy to have, like Picasso, 2 eyes on one side of his nose. And here is a young Charles Lindbergh. He looked just like Charles Lindbergh. He says, we just have to move things because I have to think about directing it. Not the screenplay, but the movie. Good talk. So I said, you're hired. I hired him right then and there.
For the record, Kornfeld also introduced Brooks to a young David Cronenberg for his remake of The Fly, starring Jeff Goldblum. Brooks hired Cronenberg, too. The Elephant Man went on to become a huge critical and commercial hit. It was nominated for Best Picture, and Lynch, in his major motion picture debut, his only full-length feature before Eraserhead, was nominated for Best Director. Robert Redford won the award that year for Ordinary People, beating out both Lynch and Martin Scorsese for Raging Bull. Oh well. Fun fact: Mel Brooks had his name taken off The Elephant Man, even though he produced it, because he thought people would see Mel Brooks presents The Elephant Man and, quite rightly, think it was a comedy, which it was not. Fun fact number 2. After Brooks Films, Kornfeld went to run Ben Stiller's production company, Red Hour Films. I knew Stewart really well. He hired me many times, put a lot of money in my pocket, and was instrumental in my getting a job working with Mel Brooks for a time. So when I talk about how smart and committed and inventive and warm-hearted and just fucking great both of these guys are, it is first-hand information. Stewart, sadly, passed away in 2020 of cancer, regrettably. He was very young. He was only 67. Best guy ever, though. Anyway, with The Elephant Man, David Lynch didn't so much appear on the scene as explode onto the scene. He was a hot property, and when you're hot, you're hot. He got offered pretty much every film that was in production at the time, including, oddly, a little film called Return of the Jedi.
I was asked by George to come up to see him and talk to him about directing, which would be the third Star Wars. And I had next door to zero interest. But I always admired George. George is a guy that does what he loves, and I do what I love. The difference is, what George loves makes hundreds of billions of dollars. So I thought I should go up and at least visit with him. And it was incredible. I had to go to this building in LA first and get a special credit card, and I had to get special keys, and a letter came and a map. And then I went into the airport, and I flew up, and then they had a rental car all ready for me, and this keys, and everything was set, and I was to drive to this place, and I came into an office, and there was George, and he talked with me for a little bit, and then he said, "I want to show you something." Now, right about in this time, I started getting a little bit of a headache. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. So he took me upstairs, and he showed me these things called Wookiees. And now this headache is getting stronger. And he showed me many animals and different things. Then he took me for a ride in his Ferrari for a lunch. And George is kind of short, so his seat was way back, and he was almost laying down in the car. We were flying through this little town up in Northern California. We went to a restaurant. Not that I don't like salad, but that's all they had was salad. Then I got a really, almost like a migraine headache. And I could hardly wait to get to home. And even before I got home, I kind of crawled into a phone booth and phoned my agent. I said, there's no way, no way I can do this. He said, David, calm down. You don't have to do this. And so George, bless his heart, I told him on the phone the next day that he should direct it. It's his film. He invented everything about it. But he doesn't really love directing. And so someone else did direct that film.
Lynch did not make Return of the Jedi, but he did make Frank Herbert's Dune for producer Dino De Laurentiis. David Lynch's Dune is a saga unto itself and is covered extensively in Max Avery's book, A Masterpiece in Disarray. Max talked about that book and the film on this podcast exactly 1 year ago in our March of 2024 episode entitled How You Dune, if you want to check that out. While Lynch did not have the burden of realizing someone else's vision, as he would have on Return of the Jedi, he did have problems on Dune. And he didn't have final cut. Dune was too big for one movie, and despite its large budget, it still wasn't large enough. Some of the special effects turned out to be decidedly subpar, and despite Lynch's valiant attempts to wrangle it into shape, the released version was not his cut. It also bombed, and Lynch went on to refer to Dune as the only one of his films that he considers a failure. Lynch bounced back from the career spanking administered by Dune with the brilliant Blue Velvet. Again, surprisingly, for Dino De Laurentiis, who loved Lynch despite Dune's failure. Now, Lynch insisted on final cut with Blue Velvet, and he got it. The trade-off was that his budget, at about $5 million, was probably smaller than Dune's catering bill. Blue Velvet, which someone once described pretty accurately as The Hardy Boys Go to Hell, was a brilliant depiction of Lynch's cinematic worldview, with America presented as a mid-century suburban wonderland, with clean, neat houses fronted by lush green lawns lined with white picket fences and bright red roses. But underneath, sinister forces lurked. When the sun set, a sadistic, nitrous-huffing Dennis Hopper might just kick the shit out of you for preferring Heineken over Pabst Blue Ribbon, and those lush green lawns were dotted with severed human ears. And that nice young man from the house next door might just hide in your closet and watch while you're sexually assaulted. What was especially great about Blue Velvet was that it was released in 1986, when American culture under Ronald Reagan was going into overdrive selling the idea that America really was a mid-century suburban wonderland, and Blue Velvet was a vital tonic for everybody who knew what a load of horseshit that was. Blue Velvet was such a perfect satire of the culture at the time, it was such a dead center bullseye, that a lot of people just weren't ready for it. Nobody was lukewarm on Blue Velvet. Audiences and critics either loved it or hated it. Roger Ebert said of the film,
"Sure, the movie's well made, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked it."
Now, to put Blue Velvet into context, this is the cinematic world in which it lived. The big box office hits of 1986 were Top Gun, The Karate Kid Part 2, and Crocodile Dundee. I think Pretty in Pink was in there somewhere, although to be fair, so was Platoon. But you can see how Lynch's dark vision rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. In his memoir, Room to Dream, co-written with Christine McKenna, Lynch quotes Dino De Laurentiis' appraisal of the film after one particularly disastrous pre-release screening. "It's a not for certain people, but it's gonna be okay." But enough people, enough critics, and enough moviegoers got it and loved it. It made money, got some stellar reviews, and David Lynch was once again nominated for Best Director, this time losing to Oliver Stone for Platoon. But voila, David Lynch was hot again. He was looking for his next project when his agents at CAA did what agents do, and that is, they put together a package. A package is where an agent bundles as many of the agency's clients together onto one particular project. It's how showbiz works. In this instance, the project was Goddess, an adaptation of the book Goddess, The Secret Lives of Marilyn Monroe, about the final months of the life of Marilyn Monroe, written by Anthony Summers. That book, among other things, implied that the actress's death could be directly tied to Robert Kennedy, which has never been proven, of course, but has been a long-standing conspiracy theory. It was great trash, and CAA proposed that Lynch team up with another one of its clients, writer Mark Frost, who had risen to fame as one of the key creative voices on the revolutionary TV cop show Hill Street Blues. Lynch and Frost got on well, and together they wrote a script, and the script came out great. And when they presented it to the studio, United Artists, they took one look at it, noted that the film implied that JFK and RFK were the bad guys in the story, and immediately passed. But Lynch and Frost liked each other, and they enjoyed working together, so they began to bat around some other ideas. They ended up writing a surrealist comedy called One Saliva Bubble. Lynch describes the story again in Room to Dream. I got this idea about a secure research facility in the fictional town of Newtonville, Kansas, and the two cretinous guys who work there. One of them laughs, and a saliva bubble goes flying out of his mouth and floats down a hallway, around a corner, and lodges in the housing of a sensitive piece of equipment and shorts it out. Then you cut to outer space and see a satellite deploy and a kind of ray gun weapon that fires, and then a countdown starts. One Saliva Bubble was well received, had heat, and was a go picture. Steve Martin and Martin Short were both signed on to star as the two cretinous employees of the secure research facility. But about a month and a half before shooting began, Dino De Laurentiis pulled the plug, citing budget concerns. His concern being he didn't have any money left for the budget, or any budget for that matter, and was closing up shop. Enter Tony Kranz. Tony Kranz was also an agent at CAA, and he got wind of the fact that one of the agency's big clients, film director David Lynch, the Blue Velvet guy, was collaborating with one of the agency's writers, a guy from Hill Street Blues. So he asked if he could meet with them to pitch them an idea that they collaborate not on a movie, but on a television series. Lynch and Frost liked the idea. They went off, and they wrote The Lemurians. What? Yes, The Lemurians. The story of Geiger counter-wielding FBI agents who travel the country in search of survivors of the lost continent, Lemuria. Lemuria is a lost, sunken continent like Atlantis, but its inhabitants were all intrinsically evil, and when Lemuria sank beneath the ocean waves, a handful of survivors escaped and are now living among us. Lemuria didn't go, but Kranz was tenacious. He wanted something more like Blue Velvet, the white picket fence with the sinister world underneath. They just needed to find the best way to graft Lynch's vision onto an established TV format. Kranz showed Lynch and Frost the series Peyton Place, the 1960s primetime TV soap opera that took America by storm from 1964 to 1968, and made movie stars of, among other people, Mia Farrow and Ryan O'Neal. Lynch hated Peyton Place, but it gave him an idea, and he and Frost sat down and worked up a concept that they called Northwest Passage. The show was set in the Pacific Northwest, in a small town that was also stuck in Lynch's neo-50s mid-century wonderland, just like Blue Velvet's Lumberton. And the jumping-off point for the story was the murder of the small town's homecoming queen. The image that kicked off the idea was that of her dead body washing up on the shores of a lake. ABC loved the idea. And then, the writer's strike of 1988. Boom! No pens moved from March to August. When the big writer's strike of 1988 was over, ABC called back and said, "Okay, guys, let's go." And Lynch and Frost said, "Great! Let's go with what?" And ABC said, that show you pitched." And they said, "Oh yeah, great. What was it again?" "The Thing, The Thing, with the dead homecoming queen." Oh yeah. Yeah. Frost and Lynch dug out their notes and wrote the pilot story, which revolved around, you guessed it, the body of a small-town homecoming queen washing up on the shores of a lake. They added the flourish that the body was now wrapped in plastic. The lead character of the show, the audience's eyes in, as they say, was FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, as played by Kyle MacLachlan, who, after starring in Dune and Blue Velvet, had become Lynch's on-screen proxy, much in the same way Robert De Niro was to Martin Scorsese. The pilot, still called Northwest Passage, was shot in and around Snoqualmie, Washington, in February of 1989. By all accounts, it was freezing. But it worked. The pilot was finished and the buzz around town was that it was amazing. Robert Iger, who was then the head of programming at ABC and is now the king of Disney, loved it. But he had a problem, a very common problem. ABC had hired David Lynch to come in and do what David Lynch does. And then he did it. So then ABC said, we can't show this. This is what David Lynch does. Robert Iger, to his credit, fought the good fight with the network brass in New York and won. And Northwest Passage, now renamed after the town it was set in, Twin Peaks, was picked up as a mid-season replacement with an 8-episode order. The pilot plus 7 additional episodes. Now the beauty of this is that it allowed enough time for all of the episodes to be written before any of them were shot. The arc of the first season was allowed to be carefully plotted and laid out. It gave them time to do it right. Lynch and Frost wrote the first 2 episodes themselves, and then Frost put together a writing staff, while Lynch went down to New Orleans to film his next movie, Wild at Heart, based on the Barry Gifford novel Wild at Heart, The Story of Sailor and Lula. There is a popular misconception that Season 2 of Twin Peaks suffered because David Lynch abandoned the show to go make Wild at Heart. That isn't true. He had finished shooting Wild at Heart before Twin Peaks even premiered. Twin Peaks was picked up to series in March of 1989, but it didn't premiere until April 8th, 1990. A full year after the pickup, which is crazy. But when it did premiere, it went through the roof. There was a strong buzz leading up to it already, and the fact that David Lynch, the Blue Velvet guy, was making a TV show was news in and of itself. Now, this was back before streaming, when the line between TV and movies was still pretty stark and distinct. 2-time Oscar-nominated directors didn't usually do TV shows, much less TV shows starring the same guy that starred in their movies. Twin Peaks hit network television and the culture itself like a sledgehammer. Twin Peaks became an overnight pop cultural sensation. Now, while the shorthand to describe it at the time was Blue Velvet, the TV show, the country had changed since Blue Velvet was released. When Ronald Reagan left office in 1989, the party that was the 1980s was breaking up and the hangover was setting in. Starting in about 1989 and lasting until about 1994, pretty much the exact length of the George H.W. Bush term, the country's mood and tone was nasty. It was a sour, headachy time. The population in general had caught up with the joke that the people who loved Blue Velvet when it first came out already knew, that the whole deal was a crock of shit. The stock market crashed, the economy soured, the presidential election was bitter and nasty, the whole mood was plangent. And this was reflected in the popular entertainment of the time. For example, the #1 box office film in 1986 was a 2-hour Navy recruitment commercial called Top Gun. In 1989, it was Tim Burton's Batman, a movie where it's always night and everyone wears black and stands around while a sociopath dressed as a bat fights another sociopath dressed as a clown. Twin Peaks was the right show at the right time, and it took the country by storm. It showed us America as we like to see ourselves. A small, friendly town with damn fine coffee and great cherry pie. And it also showed us America as we knew, deep down, we really were. A small, friendly town with damn fine coffee and great cherry pie, and a dead homecoming queen floating down the river, and a brand new brothel doing boffo business just on the outskirts of town. Twin Peaks dominated the culture that spring, summer, and fall. It was on Thursday nights, and after the first or second episodes, people started having Twin Peaks parties, where your friends would come over and you'd have cherry pie and coffee, although the coffee went largely untouched, and it became cherry pie and booze. But then you'd have cherry pie and booze and watch the show. My girlfriend and I, at the time, were all in on it. We had the famous "Have you seen this man wanted" poster of Bob on the fridge. We had a Twin Peaks Sheriff Department's coffee cup. We went bananas. One Thursday afternoon, my girlfriend at the time and I were going to have people over that night to watch the show. So we went to Ralph's, and we were going to buy a cherry pie. And they were out. They were out of cherry pie. We could not find a cherry pie in Los Angeles. Which was fine with me. I hate cherry pie. I like apple pie. And that's what we had. And I loved it. Fuck you, cherry pie. Anyway, Season 1 of Twin Peaks ended in June of 1990 on a cliffhanger, with Kyle MacLachlan's Dale Cooper lying on the floor of the Great Northern Hotel bleeding out from a bullet wound. That summer, you couldn't walk 10 feet without seeing someone in a Who Killed Laura Palmer t-shirt, or hearing Julie Cruz's ethereal Twin Peaks tie-in album Floating into the Night, written in large part by Lynch and his composer and musical partner Angelo Badalamenti. That August, Lynch's new movie Wild at Heart, starring Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, premiered, which is proof that he didn't make it later the next year. Wild at Heart got mixed reviews, but it won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and made solid box office. As Season 2 of Twin Peaks approached, Kyle MacLachlan hosted the season premiere of Saturday Night Live, and in October, David Lynch himself appeared on the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "David Lynch, the wild at art genius behind Twin Peaks." David Lynch was a brand. He was on top of the world. What could possibly go wrong? How about everything?
I can bake a cherry pie in a twinkling of an eye.
With Fluffo, Canada's highest quality shortening at a low, low price. So pure and creamy, Fluffo makes the tenderest, flakiest pie crust you ever tasted. Fluffo, Canada's highest quality shortening at a low, low price.
Gentlemen, save your battery and your disposition. When it rains, you can still enjoy the movie with a Drizzle Guard rain visor. Simply press suction cups to the windshield as shown in the detail on your instruction sheet. Drizzle Guards are on sale now at the concession stand, and remember, they are reusable.
It was May of 1990. And David Keith Lynch of Missoula, Montana, was on top of the world. His television series, Twin Peaks, co-created with Mark Frost, which had premiered in April and was only halfway through its first season run, was well on its way to becoming a global pop culture phenomenon. His new film, Wild at Heart, had just won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, beating out such other movies as Akira Kurosawa's Dreams, as well as new films by Federico Fellini, Jean-Luc Godard, and Clint Eastwood. Lynch was able to share his prize with his beautiful and talented partner, the actress Isabella Rossellini. To add yet another layer of icing to this already well-frosted cake, so popular was Lynch's TV show that on every Thursday night during the Cannes Film Festival, the festival itself held a Twin Peaks party, so attendees could drink coffee, eat pie, and watch the latest episode of the show. 1990 was the summer of Lynch. The throw caution to the wind party of the Reagan 1980s was in the rearview mirror, and Lynch's dark, twisted view was just what the doctor ordered as America began to reckon with the inevitable hangover. In a few months, as Twin Peaks was preparing its second season premiere, Lynch would grace the cover of Time magazine, labeled America's Czar of the Bizarre. The problem with being on top of the world is, where do you go from there? Let's start with Wild at Heart. Yes, it won the Palme d'Or, but it was not universally loved. Among the con attendees loudly voicing their unhappiness with the choice was film critic Roger Ebert, who was not shy in any way about his disdain of Lynch's previous film, Blue Velvet. His review of Wild at Heart was no better.
I've thought a lot about this movie since it won the Cannes Film Festival last May, which I totally disapproved of. And I think what bothers me the most about David Lynch is what I would call his only kidding syndrome. He wants to deal with the most shocking possible imagery. He wants to deal with subject matter that involves violence and images that are sure to repel the audience, and then he wants to always end with a punchline that's a joke. I hate it when Lynch tries to get off the hook of his violence by giving us cornball laughs at the end of every one of those sequences like that.
The reviews were mixed. Its box office take was good, but not great. It's not that the film wasn't of its time. It was. It just showed up a little too early. Barry Gifford, who wrote the novel it was very loosely based on, called it a big, dark musical comedy. The key word for Wild at Heart being dark. The late 80s and the early 90s were a dark, weird time. The country felt like a boiling pot with the lid clamped down just a little too tight. Lynch described the mood in an interview printed in the book Lynch on Lynch. The atmosphere gets stranger, and you pick up on that. Physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies get affected by it, whether you realize it or not. There's a tension in the air, and it's not going away, it's building. And there's a feeling that you can't plan for the future. You think more short term. Get it while you can, because the way things are going, it ain't going to be there after a while. You get shot down in the street. You can't drive on the freeway. I almost have a heart attack on the freeway. People drive like 4 inches apart at 75 miles an hour. The speed limit is 55. Everybody's right on the edge. It's like being locked in a building with 10 maniacs. Wild at Heart's detractors considered the film too weird, too violent, too extreme, lacking in the folksy charm that Twin Peaks employed to soften the blow, as it were. The Washington Post said, if Twin Peaks hinted at menace and a world gone wrong, Wild at Heart rubs your face in it. But the film did speak to the menace and the sense of a world gone wrong that really was in the air at that time. As I said, it just spoke it a little too soon. 20 months after the film's release, in the spring of 1992, a group of Los Angeles police officers who'd been caught on film blatantly beating the shit out of a guy named Rodney King were all acquitted, and David Lynch's beloved Los Angeles exploded in fire and rage that came to be known as the Rodney King riots. That same year, Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs embraced a level of on-screen mayhem that, despite coming only 2 years after Wild at Heart, seemed right in sync with the time. The following year, Michael Douglas's Falling Down told the tale of a Los Angeles man who'd had enough and takes matters and a shotgun into his own hands. In 1994, Pulp Fiction, and more specifically Natural Born Killers, which bore more than a passing resemblance to Wild at Heart, became hipster film nerd darlings. But all of that was in the future. As David Lynch flew home from Cannes, his flight was headed for Los Angeles, but his work lie in the second season of that mythical town in the Pacific Northwest, Twin Peaks. No one involved in the show was prepared for its success, not on the show or at the network. In retrospect, there was no way the second season could have held up to the level of mania of season 1. The first season of the show was comprised of the 90-minute pilot movie and only 7 episodes, all written and filmed before the show went on the air, in a vacuum, free from scrutiny. Season 2 had a full order of 22 episodes, nearly 3 times the size of season 1. And it went into production at the height of the show's mania, when you could not walk down Melrose Avenue without seeing at least a dozen people wearing Who Killed Laura Palmer t-shirts. That was the question on everyone's lips. It was an inspired promotional gimmick, if you can call blatantly ripping off Dallas's Who Shot JR inspired. The audience was clamoring for the answer. The problem was, David Lynch and Mark Frost did not want to give them the answer. The premise of the show would be the pursuit of that mystery. That would be the thread that flowed throughout the entire run of the series. Were it to be solved, were it ever to be solved, it would have been in the very last episode ever, whenever that was. The model for this was a TV series called The Fugitive, which ran from 1963 to 1967. The Fugitive told the story of Dr. Richard Kimball, played by David Jansen, and later by Harrison Ford in the film adaptation. Dr. Richard Kimball was on the run after being falsely accused of killing his wife. And he went on little adventures as he searched the country for the infamous one-armed man, who only Dr. Richard Kimball knew was his wife's real killer. The series finale, shown in 1967, was a huge, mega, blockbuster television event. It was watched by 78 million viewers. 72% of all households watching TV were watching The Fugitive. The Super Bowl is usually good for about 42%. The Fugitive was so influential on Twin Peaks that a one-armed man was put into the cast. Portrayed by Al Strobel, he was originally intended to be just a quick cameo, a nod to the show's debt to The Fugitive. But Lynch and Frost were blown away by Strobel's Shakespearean voice and acting chops, and he quickly became an indispensable part of the cast. Indeed, it is the one-armed man, known as Mike, who intones the famous
through the darkness of future past, the magician longs to see one chance out between two worlds. Fire, walk with me.
The problem was, the audience wanted to know who the killer was. And when they didn't find out, some of them stopped watching. To make matters worse, ABC had been sold to a giant media conglomerate named Cap Cities, and Cap Cities was very conservative. The suits in the executive suites at Cap Cities were uncomfortable with Twin Peaks, and bowing to pressure from upstairs, ABC head Bob Iger, who did fight hard to get the show on the air to begin with, made the suicidal decision to move the show out of its Thursday night time slot on over to Saturday nights at 10, also known as the death slot. Now, this was not an insurmountable problem, but it was a problem that could have only been solved with everybody on the same page and all hands on deck. Lynch had a lot of other stuff to do. In addition to Twin Peaks, he had, in the past year, co-created another show with Mark Frost, American Chronicles, and 2 other series were in development. He created and filmed Industrial Symphony No. 1, co-wrote an album for Julie Cruz. He directed numerous TV commercials and music videos, including Chris Isaak's Wicked Game. He still spent time with his other loves, painting, photography, sculpture, building furniture, and, oh yeah, did I mention he had a family? Mark Frost wasn't around as much either. He was distracted putting the finishing touches on his feature film directorial debut, Storyville. Writers Harley Payton and Robert Engels were brought in, But they, through no fault of their own, were not David Lynch and Mark Frost. Citing the steadily dwindling audience, the network leaned hard on the creative team at the show to solve the goddamn murder. Give us something to advertise. So, against their better judgment, they did. The killer was revealed to be, well, you know. And if you don't, I don't want to ruin it. And then the show drifted. New storylines were introduced, but it was all weak sauce. With Lynch and Frost not on the job full-time, the show became kind of a parody of itself. The ratings continued to nosedive, and despite the fact that it did eventually slowly begin to recover, the bloom was off the old blue rose. And in April of 1991, after the 20th episode of the second season, ABC canceled the show and took it off the schedule. There were 2 episodes left, and they would be aired as a special movie in June, which was ABC's way of saying both episodes will be dumped on the same night in the summer to limit their damage. It was 1 month shy of a year since David Lynch had won the Palme d'Or, his show the hottest thing on television. The gods giveth, and they taketh away. But something unexpected did happen, as it always does. Although overwhelmed by the day-to-day grind of a 22-episode show order, Lynch did love his creation. And before it left the airwaves, he wanted to regain control of it. He came back to direct its final episode.
Victory is at hand. The party's over. White Queen. It's time for the last act. Black Lodge. The final episode of a television legend. It's the 2-hour conclusion of Red Room. Twin Peaks. Monday.
The final episode of Twin Peaks' second season aired on June 10th, 1991, and is one of the most amazing, surrealistic, mind-bending hours of network television ever broadcast. Set primarily in the Black Lodge, Lynch threw out the script and improvised his way through the hour. In the book Lynch on Lynch, he told Chris Rodley, "When it came to the Red Room, it was, in my opinion, completely and totally wrong. Completely and totally wrong. And so I changed that part." Twin Peaks staff writer Harley Payton, who along with Robert Engels and Mark Frost wrote the original script, said, "When word started trickling back that David was making some changes, I reacted with outrage until I saw the episode. And then I was just in awe. That finale was one of the best hours of TV I'd ever seen." And it's true. The season 2 finale is an hour-long, largely silent, surrealist collage. And it's mind-boggling to think that it aired on network television between commercials for cars and beer and Cool Whip. And no, it did not wrap up the show in a tiny bow. In fact, it posed more questions than it answered. It did finally stumble upon a storyline that would have matched Who Killed Laura Palmer. Unfortunately, it came up with it about 13 episodes too late. After confronting his evil doppelganger in the Black Lodge, Twin Peaks concluded with Kyle MacLachlan's Dale Cooper consigned to the Red Room, while his evil doppelganger is free to wreak havoc in the world. The show ended with Dale Cooper's evil twin smiling into the bathroom mirror while the demonic spirit Bob, who possessed the man who killed Laura Palmer, stared back. He then smashes his own face into the mirror, and as blood gushes down from the wound, he starts laughing. The end. What? Yep. The series finale of Twin Peaks was so good it actually gave ABC second thoughts about canceling the show, but they got over it. Lynch and Frost's other series, American Chronicles, Hotel Room, and On the Air, all died quick deaths. It would seem to be the end of a chapter in his career and in his life. He had broken up with Isabella Rossellini and seemed poised to make a fresh start on all fronts. Enter the French. Lynch may have been on a downward trend here in America, but he was beloved by the French, just like Jerry Lewis. it does explain Wild at Heart's win at Cannes. While Lynch saw Wild at Heart as the story of, in his words, two people finding love in hell, the French saw Wild at Heart as a satire on America, the same way they saw Jerry Lewis as a living satire of Americans. And whether or not that was the direct intention of Dave or Jerry, only they know, and you'll need a Ouija board to ask them. But French construction magnate Francis Bourget had more money than he knew what to do with. So he formed a company called CIBY 2000. I guess it's Cibi 2000. And Cibi 2000 was going to make movies. So he made a deal with David Lynch. It was simple and direct. Lynch could make 4 movies, and they could be anything he wanted, and he would have final cut and complete directorial control as long as he kept the budget under $10 million. Now, he could have used this opportunity to close the chapter on Twin Peaks, which had lost favor with the public. He could have gone after his long, elusive cinematic white whale, Ronnie Rocket. He could have remounted One Saliva Bubble with Steve Martin and Martin Short. But he never viewed his career that way. He got into filmmaking through painting, not film. He viewed movies as paintings that moved. And painters paint what's in their head. And so, only 1 month after it went off the air, the series finale coming in 59th in the ratings. Below, among other things, Morris the Cat Salutes Hollywood Pets, hosted by Alex Trebek. It was announced his new film would be a Twin Peaks movie. What? Yep. In his own words, he was still in love with that world and he was not ready to leave it. Twin Peaks diehard fans were happy. Thank God. We'll get to find out what happens to Dale Cooper. That's what series co-creator Mark Frost thought as well. Nope. That ain't the story Lynch wanted to tell. He wanted to show the last week in the life of Twin Peaks MacGuffin, Laura Palmer. Mark Frost really wanted to move the story forward, not backwards. Why make a movie to which everyone knows the ending? But Lynch, ever the painter, could only do what was in his head. So Frost stepped away and Lynch wrote the film with Twin Peaks staff writer Robert Engels. The resulting movie was 1992's Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. People hated it. Hated it. Hated it. Hated it. The only people who were ever going to see that movie were the people who still loved Twin Peaks. And those people wanted Twin Peaks, cherry pie and coffee, the log lady, a spooky mystery offset by funny stuff and weird shit. The movie didn't star Kyle MacLachlan, it starred Cheryl Lee, who had very little track record and was initially hired off an 8x10 to play a corpse. Fortunately for all involved, Lee turned out to be something of a powerhouse and was more than up to the job. Now, Dale Cooper did have a huge role in the film. He was supposed to appear in about the first 30 minutes and then come back towards the end, in Lynch fashion, flashbacks from the future. But despite being Lynch's on-air avatar since 1984's Dune, MacLachlan felt abandoned by Lynch when he stepped back from the show's second season and allowed it to flounder. He didn't like the tone or the violence or the lack of Twin Peaksy charm in Fire Walk With Me's script and didn't want to be in it. Other major cast members, Lara Flynn Boyle and Sherilyn Fenn among them, also declined to be in the movie for similar reasons. Undeterred, a dog with a bone, Lynch marched on. Kyle MacLachlan's Dale Cooper became Chris Isaac's Chet Desmond. Before production began, Lynch and MacLachlan did bury the hatchet. They were, after all, close friends, and Coop did come back for what amounts to a prolonged cameo. Now, many of the other show's characters did return for fan service-y scenes, but when the first cut of the film came in, it was close to 5 hours long. And Lynch's editor, Mary Sweeney, who was by now his romantic partner as well, convinced him to cut everything that was not intrinsic to Laura Palmer's story. She was right in that it did get the film down to an acceptable 2-hour and 15-minute running time. But Laura's story is a downer, to say the least. Drug abuse, prostitution, incest, and murder. Throw in popcorn and a soda, and you've got a night at the movies. 2 years after Wild at Heart won the grand prize at the Cannes Film Festival, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me premiered there and was booed. The press conference for the film was hostile. Roger Ebert, rubbing his palms together, called it a shockingly bad film. Quentin Tarantino, who was at Cannes at the same time with Reservoir Dogs, and who was well on his way to quite successfully supplanting Lynch as the cinematic hipster's auteur du jour, said, "After I saw Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me at Cannes, David Lynch had disappeared so far up his own ass that I had no desire to see another David Lynch movie until I hear something different. And I loved him. I loved him." It was released in late August of 1992, the cinematic equivalent of Saturday night at 10 p.m. The film only made about $4 million, far less than its budget, and was out of theaters in a little over a month. The Lynch Frost comedy series On the Air premiered around the same time and disappeared just as quickly. Hollywood is chock full of films that were maligned critically upon their first release and or were box office bombs that went on to become classics. Let's start with, Citizen Kane. Am I comparing Fire Walk with Me to Citizen Kane? No, I am not. Although it would be safe to say that it is the Citizen Kane of incest murder movies. But there are films like Blade Runner, The Shawshank Redemption, Fight Club, Touch of Evil, John Carpenter's The Thing, Apocalypse Now, films that were considered creative and or box office failures upon their release that were reevaluated over time, found their audience, and achieved their current classic status. Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me has undergone a similar critical and audience reassessment. At its core, the TV show was a parody of primetime soap operas that would ping-pong back and forth between being really ridiculous and funny and being really creepy and scary. And believe me, that's my favorite thing. At its core, the movie was a tragedy. It was just the dark, sad tale of the destruction of a young woman because of sexual abuse. It's not goofy, it ain't silly, it ain't fun. We're not talking apples and oranges. We're talking apples and root canal. In 1992, at least in terms of popular culture, when it came to sexual abuse, people did not want to talk about it. They did not want to think about it. And when confronted with it, they reacted with hostility. But since then, our culture has evolved. The Me Too movement happened. And as the culture changed, so did people's attitudes. I think there have been more books, articles, and think pieces written about Fire Walk with Me than any other Lynch film. When the film was released on Criterion, they added an hour and a half of footage that was cut, which basically amounts to a whole other movie called The Missing Pieces. And The Missing Pieces is basically all of that fan service stuff with the other characters. And if you go online, you can find fan edits where this footage was put back into the movie, and you get a sense of what that original very long cut would have felt like. I saw one called the Q2 fan edit, and I actually think that it is an improvement. It's 3 hours and 15 or so minutes, maybe even longer, but that extra footage does tend to lighten the tone intermittently, and it does recreate a sense of the show while not being so light that it is invalidating to the harsher material. So I kind of recommend it. One last thing, at the risk of becoming heavy, the film has been embraced by the survivors of abuse because it tells their story. And, Laura Palmer in the film never stops fighting. She never surrenders. So I would call the film an unsuccessful triumph. But that is now. In 1992, the film bore the stink of a million skunks. Lynch was mystified by the reaction to the film and retreated from all things Hollywood. He never stopped working, but he and Mary Sweeney and their new child bought a house on a lake in Wisconsin. Lynch painted, designed furniture, bought a motorboat, and went into a long period of quiet battery charging. And then, in September of 1994, he started doing something that would, over time, plant the seed for the project that would eventually put him back behind the camera. It was the most normal, unremarkable, un-David Lynchy thing David Lynch ever did. He began watching the O.J. trial.
Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack. We promise to satisfy your hunger, your thirst, your sweet tooth. So visit our refreshment center now. Let's go!
Popcorn, rich with hot melted butter. Steaming hot coffee. Your favorite cigarettes. Make sure you get yours and enjoy it now.
Like good food? Oh, fast service? Try Bob's, home of the big boy hamburger. Dinner ready? Tired of cooking? Try Bob's, home of the big boy hamburger. Pack a lunch? Try Bob's, home of the big boy hamburger. Like comic books? They're free at Bob's. Food's good, too.
On the very early morning of June 13th, 1994, just 10 minutes after midnight, a man heard a dog barking incessantly somewhere down the street from his home on Bundy Drive in Brentwood, California. Brentwood is a very quiet, very secluded, very expensive residential area just northwest of Beverly Hills, where luxury cars line quiet streets full of giant houses. The man walked outside to investigate and found the barking dog, an Akita, which is like a husky. The dog was wandering down the middle of the street. Its paws were covered in blood. The neighbor followed the bloody paw prints back to a nearby house, where he saw a human body lying in a puddle of said blood on the front walk. There was another body lying just a few feet away. The police were called to the scene and the bodies were identified. One was a waiter from the nearby Mezzaluna restaurant, a 25-year-old kid named Ron Goldman. The other was the owner of the house, 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, the ex-wife of celebrity football star O.J. Simpson. The police called Simpson, who had just arrived in Chicago for a corporate event, having flown there earlier that evening, and informed him that his ex-wife was dead. O.J. sounded stunned. Nicole is dead? Oh my God, Nicole is dead? Amidst all the shock and the stunned silence and the repeating over and over, Nicole is dead, there was one thing that Simpson did not say. At no point in the call did he ask, What happened? O.J. Simpson's subsequent arrest, Bronco chase, and trial was the story of 1994 and 1995. Everyone was glued to their TV set. Film director David Lynch was no exception. Now, only a few years earlier, in the summer of 1990, when his TV series Twin Peaks dominated the pop culture landscape and his film Wild at Heart had won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, Lynch was one of the biggest stories. He was a man of his time. The 80s had ended, and the first George Bush presidency from 89 to 93 saw a souring of the economy, a war in Kuwait, and the start of the virulent left-right political divide that has since come to define our culture. Everybody knew that we weren't all that we said we were to ourselves, and David Lynch's dark vision was just what the doctor ordered. But that brief window of time did not stay open long. By 1992, when the TV series theatrical spin-off Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me was released, Lynch's unique tone and storytelling style seemed to many like an overused, tired shtick. He must have had whiplash. And so, he retreated. Although still maintaining his home in Los Angeles, Lynch and his partner, Mary Sweeney, with their newborn son in tow, bought a house on Lake Mendota in Wisconsin. Although he never stopped working, he continued to paint, design furniture, and direct the odd commercial now and again. But for the most part, he stayed clear of the limelight and recharged his batteries. To use his own phrase, he went fishing for ideas. And watching the trial of O.J. Simpson, he hooked one. What fascinated Lynch was O.J. Simpson's behavior. Lynch, like most people, believed that O.J. was guilty. There was never a credible alternate theory of the case, unless, as Bob Odenkirk said at the time, you believed in drug dealers on jetpacks with machetes for hands. Upon his acquittal, O.J. shrugged, smirked, and went back to golfing. Lynch began to wonder what kind of mental calisthenics would allow one to achieve such a state. It was as if Simpson had convinced himself of his own innocence. Because he could never conceive of doing what he did, it had to have been some other person entirely. Lynch married that idea with another one that he'd been toying with, one that, supposedly, he came up with on set during the very last day of shooting on Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me. The idea of a couple waking up and finding a videotape on their front step. And when they play the tape, it's a video of them. Lynch called Barry Gifford, who had written the novel Wild at Heart, and the two men, after a little back and forthing, wrote the script for a heady, atmospheric film noir that took its title from a line in Gifford's book, Night Creatures, Lost Highway. Now that's all well and good, but let's remember, Lynch was cold fish in Hollywood at this time. Re-enter the French. Lost Highway, like Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, was made in America with French funding. The story is set in Los Angeles, but it's David Lynch's Los Angeles, a goth-tinged, quasi-mid-century Los Angeles where girls who look like Betty Page and guys who dress like Fonzie dance to Nine Inch Nails and Marilyn Manson. Released in 1997, it was Lynch's first film in 5 years. The reviews were mixed. It was praised and dissed with equal fervor, but it was not in any way run through the critical grinder that Fire Walk With Me was. Its soundtrack, heavy with Nine Inch Nails, goth and industrial tracks, was an unqualified hit. Indeed, kids who would have otherwise never heard of David Lynch or his movie bought the soundtrack and discovered both. Lynch's collaboration with Trent Reznor put both men on the cover of Rolling Stone, with Reznor front and center and Lynch lurking impishly over his shoulder. The magazine's reviewer gushed over the film, claiming, somewhat over-enthusiastically, that it was Lynch's best film to date. What Lost Highway was the first salvo in a new phase of Lynch's career and creativity. one in which he embraced a wholly new and different approach to storytelling. It was, no doubt, unapologetically challenging. David Foster Wallace wrote a now-famous piece on Lynch in Premiere magazine that was published prior to the film's release. There was a lot of buzz around it, being his first movie in half a decade. In the piece, Wallace questioned whether Lynch, and I quote, gives a shit whether his reputation is rehabilitated or not. This attitude, like Lynch himself, like his work, seems grandly admirable and sort of nuts. Indeed, when Siskel and Ebert both panned the film, Ebert maintaining a streak of not liking any Lynch movie since Eraserhead, he had the Lost Highway poster amended to include the tagline, 2 thumbs down, 2 more great reasons to see Lost Highway. And as someone who saw that poster at the time, I can assure you it did make you want to see it. Author Martha Nachemson has written 2 books about Lynch, The Passion of David Lynch, which covers everything up to Fire Walk with Me, and David Lynch Swerves, where, informed by long conversations with the director, she examines everything from Lost Highway onward, a period in which, as the title suggests, Lynch began approaching his film work from a new direction. This combined his spiritual beliefs — Lynch was a dedicated vocal proponent of transcendental meditation — his attitudes towards modern society as laid out in the ancient Hindu Holy Vedas, which speaks of reality as a multi-tiered crudité of perception and potential experience, with a dash of quantum mechanics and the unified field theory thrown in for good measure. It is a mouthful, to be sure, but if you chew on it long enough, you can get it down, and you will begin to see that there was a method to the madness. Let's start with the practice of transcendental meditation. TM, which I practice, allows one to transcend to a different level of consciousness, a place Lynch described in his book on TM and the creative process, Catching the Big Fish, as an ocean of creativity. In its simplest explanation, TM allows you to enter a dream state even though you're not asleep. Lynch employed this, we'll call it dream logic, into everything he did from Lost Highway on. In Lost Highway, jazz saxophonist Fred Madison, played by Bill Pullman, living in a dark house and trapped in a dying marriage, gets a message on his front door intercom telling him that Dick Laurent is dead. Only Fred doesn't know who Dick Laurent is. Then he and his wife, played by Patricia Arquette, begin receiving videotapes at their front door. The tapes contain footage of their house and later of themselves asleep inside their house. Later, at a party, Fred is confronted by a mysterious man. The character's name is Mystery Man, played by Robert Blake.
We've met before, haven't we?
I don't think so. Where was it you think we met?
At your house, don't you remember?
No, I don't. Are you sure?
Of course. As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
Eventually, Fred wakes up in prison, having learned that he has murdered his wife, although he has no memory of it. But before Fred can go to the electric chair, there's a problem. The guard checking on Fred's cell discovers one morning that Fred isn't there. In his place is a young auto mechanic named Pete Dayton, played by Balthazar Getty. Well, Pete can't go to the electric chair on Fred's behalf, so out he goes. This is Lynch's take on O.J. Simpson's personality displacement, which is called a psychogenic fugue, made literal. Fred, like O.J., does not believe he could have murdered his own wife, so it must have been someone else. But since he actually did murder his wife, he therefore has to become someone else to continue existing. But wherever you go, there you are. Poor Pete Dayton has his own problems. With a nod to Double Indemnity, The Postman Always Rings Twice, and a fistful of other classic noirs, Pete is having a torrid affair with Alice Wakefield, also played by Patricia Arquette, but a different character than Fred Madison's doomed wife. Or is she? Alice Wakefield is involved with a gangster and porn producer named Mr. Eddie, played by Robert Loggia. And before long, Alice has poor, dumb Pete Dayton involved in a scheme to whack Mr. Eddie and get him out of their lives. And his as well, I guess. Duality being the theme of the film, we then find out that Mr. Eddie is also someone else. He goes by another name, Dick Laurent. But before Pete can whack Mr. Eddie / Dick Laurent, he transforms back into Fred Madison. Why? Well, look when it happens. Just as poor Pete Dayton has decided to commit a murder, Fred's attempt to escape his murderous self has failed. He cannot get away from who he is. After he kills Dick Laurent, he watches him die and is then joined by Robert Blake's mystery man, who it seems was an agent of Fred's all along. Madison then has to get the hell out of Dodge, but on his way out of town, he makes a stop. He swings by his house and leaves a message on the intercom. Dick Laurent is dead. His message is heard by him from earlier in the story. Time is a flat circle, and Fred is here to tell Fred that he's a killer, which is bad news for Fred's wife. The film ends with Fred Madison screaming into the black night as he roars across the desert, a line of police cars in hot pursuit. Wherever he goes, whoever he becomes, he can't escape. Fun fact: the film's Robert Blake was later put on trial for killing his own wife. He was exonerated. It also features music by Marilyn Manson, who is accused of doing everything but killing Robert Blake's wife. Although Blake was lauded for his chilling performance, I used to see him at our Whole Foods, and I can assure you he wasn't acting. What you see in Lost Highway is pretty much how Robert Blake used to stand around the bulk bins. Lost Highway put Lynch back on Hollywood's map and things started percolating quickly. Lynch's agent, Tony Krantz, who first encouraged him to try his hand at TV, had since left CAA and was now head of Imagine Television. And he still believed that his old buddy Dave had a hit TV series in him. After having 3 shows crash and burn back-to-back, Twin Peaks, On the Air, and Hotel Room, Lynch had sworn off TV for good. To send the point home, Twin Peaks' Fire Walk With Me begins with a television set being smashed with an axe. But Krantz felt the time was right and approached Lynch with an idea for a series. An idea of Lynch's, in fact, from several years ago. This idea began life as a potential Twin Peaks spin-off. In the heyday of the show's success, there was some talk of giving Sherilyn Fenn's Audrey Horne her own series, where she leaves Twin Peaks and moves to Hollywood to become an actress. Krantz and Lynch pitched the show to ABC in 1999, and it was picked up for a pilot. The show would not star Sherilyn Fenn and would not feature the character of Audrey Horne. Twin Peaks was, at this point, in Lynch's own words, dead as a doornail. But the idea was very much alive. An original story about a bright-eyed, homespun, freshly scrubbed young woman who moves to Hollywood to become a star. Not long after arriving, she meets another woman, a sullen, dark-eyed brunette who is suffering amnesia following a violent car accident. The series would follow the adventures of these 2 women as they form an unlikely friendship. They are, after all, living opposites, as they seek to solve the murder of just who the hell one of them is. It had a cool, provocative title, Mulholland Drive. But before Lynch could write the pilot for Mulholland Drive, which he was going to do alone as he and Mark Frost had long ago dissolved their partnership, he had to go and do the most Lynchian thing he ever did. What was that, you ask? Well, Lynchian, thanks to David Foster Wallace, was by now a synonym for weird. So what could David Lynch do that people would consider weird? You know, what was weird for David Lynch? How about he make a G-rated movie for Disney? For the past couple of years, Lynch's partner Mary Sweeney, along with her producing partner Neil Edelstein, had been tracking the true story of a guy named Alvin Straight. Alvin Straight was the quintessential middle American dude. He was a veteran of World War II and the Korean War, where he served in the infantry. After leaving the Army, he settled in Iowa. He fathered 7 children and worked as, and I quote his Wikipedia bio, a laborer. In 1994, Alvin's 80-year-old brother Henry suffered a stroke at his home in Blue River, Wisconsin, some 250 miles away. Alvin wanted to visit his brother, but he wasn't in the greatest shape himself. He was 73, he was suffering from emphysema, diabetes had done a number on his eyesight, so he no longer qualified for a driver's license. But Alvin wanted to see his brother, and he wanted to make the trip alone. So he did it on his lawnmower. The trip takes about 4.5 hours by car, but Alvin, moving at an average clip of about 5 miles an hour, managed to knock it out in about 6 weeks. It was far from uneventful, but to get the full story, you should really see the movie. The Straight Story had a limited release, but was a critical smash. If you have an ounce of humanity, it is impossible not to be moved by it. Even Roger Ebert loved it. Richard Farnsworth gave his final screen performance as Alvin Straight and was nominated for Best Actor. He was fighting cancer during the making of the film and is in great pain throughout. You can see it burning in his eyes in every frame. He carries the film effortlessly, a quiet, still, dignified presence. It is impossible to take your eyes off him. Now, you might ask, I just gassed on and on about how David Lynch had embarked on a new plane of storytelling, the psycho time loop multiple identity labyrinth that is Lost Highway being the prime example. So how, you might ask, does The Straight Story fit in? It does. The Straight Story is Lost Highway's opposite. Duality has always been key to David Lynch's work. John Merrick, a man so disfigured he is named the Elephant Man, is the most human character in his story. Laura Palmer, prom queen by day, trick-turning drug addict by night. The good Dale Cooper, trapped in the Black Lodge, and the evil Dale Cooper, out running amok. And then along comes Alvin Straight. Lost Highway ends where it begins, a circular trip through one man's never-ending self-inflicted torture. The Straight Story, by contrast, tells the simplest story imaginable. A man has to get from point A to point B. The end. He wants to see his brother, and at the movie's conclusion, he does. The story is a straight line across the plains of the Midwest. The title tells us what it is: a straight story. Lynch wrote and shot the Mulholland Drive TV pilot while The Straight Story was still in post-production. For the 2 leads, he chose a relatively unknown actress named Naomi Watts to play Betty Elms, the bright-eyed, blonde-haired, freshly scrubbed ingenue fresh off the bus in the big city. Watts was, and still is, a British-born actress who lived in Australia before coming to the U.S. She happened to be Nicole Kidman's best friend, but had been in L.A. for nearly 10 years knocking on doors with little to show for it, while her buddy Nicole married Tom Cruise and became a global super-duper star. For Betty's opposite number, Laura Herring, a former Miss USA, who had previously had a small role in Adam Sandler's Little Nicky, was cast as the mysterious woman suffering amnesia. Her character has no name at first, she doesn't know who she is, and so she adopts the name Rita, off a poster for the movie Gilda, starring Rita Hayworth, that is hanging in Betty's apartment. Blonde, smiling Betty knows exactly who she is and what she wants to be: a movie star, but also a great actress. Brunette, sullen Rita doesn't even know her name. We are back to Dave's Duality Playhouse with a vengeance. What followed, with the making of the TV pilot version of Mulholland Drive, is a tale as old as time. ABC hired David Lynch to create a pilot, and then they did everything in their power to de-David Lynchify it so it wasn't so damn David Lynchy. Tired of fighting the network on every front, the most outrageous note being that the two lead actresses, the ones the network approved of, suddenly seemed to the network to be too old. Lynch learned that ABC had passed on Mulholland Drive while literally leaving for Cannes with the as-yet-to-be-released The Straight Story, and admitted to feeling a wave of euphoria upon hearing the news. He might have been finished with Mulholland Drive, but Mulholland Drive was not finished with him. Re-enter the French. Pierre Edelman was a film producer working for the French company Studio Canal. He was a friend of Lynch and a fan, and when he heard that there was a completed film by the director, even one that was made for television, that nobody was going to see, he became intrigued. He arranged for Studio Canal to buy back the negative of Mulholland Drive from ABC, give Lynch some more money to shoot what's called a closed ending. The Mulholland Drive pilot, like the Twin Peaks pilot before it, was left unresolved at the end, so that the TV series could pick up the story. The famous Red Room dream sequence in episode 3 of Twin Peaks' first season was originally intended to be the ending of the theatrical release of the pilot, which was shown as a feature film, but only in Europe. This is done largely as a way to recoup some of the money should the pilot not go to series. You know, throw it on some screens in Italy and Scotland and make back a little dough. Studio Canal hoped a similar device could wrap up Mulholland Drive, although that's not quite what happened. Nor, by the way, was any of this as easy as it sounds. The sentence, "He arranged to have Studio Canal buy back the negative from ABC and get some more money to Lynch to shoot an ending to the story," is about as much of an understatement as they formed an organization called NASA and sent some dudes to the moon. In addition to the technical headache involved in adapting a film shot for television to a film intended to be projected on the big screen, the two involved different frame rates, the actors had to agree to come back, and everybody else on the crew had to sign off on the project, because their contracts were originally for a TV pilot, and now it was a theatrical movie, and that's a whole different pay scale. The point is, this endeavor was in no way simple. Making a hard job harder, David Lynch himself was not keen on the idea at all. His initial response to Pierre Edelman was, "I don't want to hear anything about this anymore." Lynch was not thrilled with the way ABC handled the whole situation. He didn't like the notes, the sets had been trashed, the props and wardrobe had all gone back into the production stream. Lynch felt it would be impossible to recreate the world of Mulholland Drive properly in order to finish the film. And even if he could recreate it, he had no idea how to end it. That idea being the most important element. That said, Lynch eventually came around and agreed to Edelman's proposal, and all of the appropriate deals were hammered out. A full year had gone by since filming had wrapped on Mulholland Drive. And then, to quote the man himself from his memoir Room to Dream, written with Kristen McKenna, "I sit down to meditate, and like a string of pearls, one idea after another came along. And when I finished meditating, I knew how to finish the film." He did more than just finish the film. The string of pearls that Lynch formed while meditating turned the TV pilot inside out, transmogrifying the show's Nancy Drew mystery into a Wizard of Oz-like fantasia. Naomi Watts is not really aspiring ingenue Betty Elms. She's a beaten-down wannabe actress named Diane Selwyn, who imagines she's Betty Elms. The mysterious Rita is really Diane's former lover, Camilla Rhodes. It's a story of unrequited love, desire, and humanity's addiction to fantasy, as exemplified by Hollywood itself. Upon its release, it was immediately hailed as Lynch's masterpiece. He was once again nominated for Best Director at that year's Academy Awards, and once again lost, this time to Ron Howard, for A Beautiful Mind. The best summation of the entire experience came, again from Lynch, again from Room to Dream. So we finished the film, and it was exactly what it was supposed to be. And we went to Cannes. It went well in the world, but it never made a lot of money. But nothing I do ever really does. We're all just working for the man now. We get a shot of white lightning and a chick, and that's about it. With a critically acclaimed film and an Oscar nomination, Lynch had a good chance of setting up another movie, but his days of being a director for hire, as far as feature films were concerned, were a thing of the past. He spent the first decade of the 2000s solidly ensconced at his compound in the Hollywood Hills, painting, making music, making furniture, making the odd commercial. As the age of the internet dawned, he launched DavidLynch.com, which functioned as a micro-mini dial-up TV network programmed exclusively by Lynch. For $10 a month, you got stuff like a primitive flash animation cartoon called Dumbland, Rabbits, a sitcom about a family of rabbits starring the cast of Mulholland Drive in rabbit suits. And yes, that really is Naomi Watts and Laura Herring in the suits. Music, photos, paintings. One of my favorite things was a 5-minute short called Dead Mouse with Ants, which shows exactly what it describes. But you can't say it's not fascinating. The site was run out of his home studio, as was all the music. He was getting closer and closer to his dream of living what he called the art life. In his words,
the art life is a great life. It's coffee and cigarettes, maybe some red wine. It's catching ideas and translating them to one medium or another. In the world of painting, it's getting deep into that world and just getting lost in there. It's just a dream. I always loved to paint and draw. I felt like this was the life of a painter.
Whatever he did, paintings, sculpture, songs, an internet sitcom starring rabbits, he approached it the way a painter approaches a painting. It came from his imagination and was done on his terms. He certainly was not doing it for money. He could have made a fortune for himself if he just took some gigs, and he was offered them. American Beauty, The Ring, on and on. But he wanted to be in his studio, following his muse. One morning, in 2005, he was walking outside his home and bumped into Laura Dern, who had starred in Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. They hadn't seen each other in a while, and as it turns out, Dern was now Lynch's neighbor. As they caught up, she casually said, "We should do something." Something turned out to be a 14-page monologue that Lynch wrote for Dern that he shot on a little digital video camera. Just another one of David's little experiments, filmed in 4 hours in his painting studio. But when they were done, David caught another idea, saying to Dern, "What if this is a movie?" That movie became 2006's Inland Empire, a 3-hour experimental dream logic psychological thriller starring Dern, Justin Theroux, Jeremy Irons, Grace Zabriskie, and a host of others. Shot completely on digital video in Los Angeles and Poland. The film followed the trajectory of Lynch's artistic evolution. He worked without a finished script. He did rely on a scene-by-scene outline, but the freedom of digital video allowed him to make the film the way a painter paints. He was handling the directing as well as, more or less, the cinematography, editing, and sound design. If he had an idea on the fly, he did it. It was run and gun, but he knew what he wanted. The only time the film ever ran into trouble with audiences was when they came expecting a linear story. To maintain the painting analogy, people came looking for landscapes and got surrealism instead. You might not like it, but you must, at the very least, judge it for what it is. The film, which does have a story, fared much better in Europe, where audiences were accustomed to challenging narrative styles. France's Cinema Bible Cahiers du Cinéma listed Inland Empire as the second best film of the year. It was listed as one of the films of the decade by Sight and Sound, and cited as one of the 10 most underrated movies of the decade by The Guardian. The biggest film in America that year was Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest. If he was disappointed by American audiences' perplexed reaction to Inland Empire, he certainly did not show it. He seemed completely free of expectation, happy to create. He released 2 musical albums the following year, Polish Night Music, an instrumental collaboration with Marek Zabrowski, and The Air is on Fire, an exhibition soundscape. In other words, an ambient soundtrack for an art exhibition with Dean Hurley. In 2011, he released Crazy Clown Time, his first honest-to-God solo record. Co-written and co-produced with Dean Hurley. If you like David Lynch, if you like his movies, if you like his soundtracks, you will like his other albums. Karen O, lead singer of the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, provides the vocal on the opening track, Pinky's Dream.
Pinky's dodge, going fast away. Purple, going up away. Orange, glowing away. Pinky's dream, glowing away. What do you see? Flying down
At the end of 2011, just after Christmas, Lynch got a call from an old pal, Twin Peaks co-creator Mark Frost, and the two men went out to lunch at Musso and Frank's. Frost pointed out something interesting. The last time we saw Dale Cooper and Laura Palmer, the good Dale Cooper was trapped in the Red Room, and Palmer says to him,
I'll see you again in 25 years.
That 25-year deadline was coming up, and the two men began a serious discussion about how to properly return to that mysterious town in the Pacific Northwest. Without telling a soul, they began collaborating on a script. They took their time. It was well over a year just figuring out how to go about it. One thing that Twin Peaks: The Return, its eventual title, makes clear is that while they did want to go back to Twin Peaks, they did not want to go back to 1990. While featuring the cast and locations of the old show, it expands upon that world aggressively, adding over 100 new speaking roles and spanning the globe from Twin Peaks to New York City to the suburbs of Las Vegas to Paris. Of course, nobody knew any of this was happening until October 3rd, 2014, when David Lynch and Mark Frost simultaneously posted to what was then Twitter, "Dear Twitter friends, that gum you like is going to come back in style. Hashtag damn good coffee." And people lost their shit. The journey from here to there was not easy. But as Mulholland Drive showed, sometimes you just have to settle back and ride the bull. It's gonna get to where it needs to get, however it has to get there, and however long it takes. Lynch actually walked away from The Return at one point because he felt that a deal just could not be made. The problem being that Showtime was thinking of the show in the traditional television episodic format. You make this many shows and we'll give you X amount of dollars per show. But Lynch had grown past that. He might have been making Twin Peaks, but this was still the man who made Inland Empire. Lynch saw Twin Peaks: The Return as one big movie, an epic, that he and Frost would write and that Lynch would direct. The new series relied heavily on the lore established in the now reappraised and rehabilitated Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. And unlike that film, Lynch was not about to leave half of what he shot on the cutting room floor to make his running time. He was going to shoot what he wanted to shoot, and he was going to figure out how many episodes it would comprise when they were in the editing room. Eventually, a deal was struck, and the two men got down to work, embarking on a 4-year odyssey that would end up as a sprawling 18-episode season. It was not what anyone was expecting. And like all of Lynch's post-Twin Peaks work, it was often challenging and maddening. But in the end, it was, like his films, something you could go back to again and again and again and never not find something new. It confounded expectations, but was never unsatisfying. The story is actually quite clear. It just doesn't spell itself out in a billboard so you won't miss it while also scrolling on your phone and staring at a sandwich. The good Dale Cooper has been trapped in the Black Lodge for 25 years, and it is now time for the evil Dale, who is on the outside and now going by the name Mr. C, to go back in. But he doesn't want to, so he creates a tulpa, a figure from Tibetan mysticism, basically a stand-in or an avatar. So when the beings from the Black Lodge come for Mr. C, they get the tulpa instead, leaving Mr. C free to wreak havoc in the world. And oh boy, has he wreaked it. He reeks and reeks and reeks. The guy cannot stop reeking. The tulpa comes in the form of Dougie Jones, a corrupt insurance agent from Las Vegas. All three roles, Dougie, the good Dale, and the bad Dale, are played in a bravura performance by Kyle MacLachlan. It is criminally underpraised. He knocks it out of the park. Of the 18 episodes, I will mention 3 specifically. Episode 8, which traces the origin of Bob, the evil entity from the Black Lodge, back to the atomic explosions of the 1950s. That episode, shot entirely in black and white and largely without dialogue, is quite simply one of the best horror films of that decade. If George Romero was making horror films in 1956, he could not have made a better film than Twin Peaks: The Return, Episode 8. Episode 17 rewards the viewer by bringing the story to a seemingly happy, conventional ending. But then, in Episode 18, it is all undone by our hero's hubris and good intentions. It hits you like a fist in the chest and shows you that at every twist and turn of this 18-hour saga, David Lynch and Mark Frost were fully in command. They knew exactly what they were doing, where they were heading, and how they were going to get there. Following The Return, Lynch went back to his art studio. His online presence, davidlynch.com, had shut down but still existed, and Lynch continued to do his morning weather report, which became a staple, especially in Los Angeles. Oddly, it was during the height of the pandemic, when everyone was on lockdown, that everyone in LA that I knew of started their day with David Lynch's weather report and sermonette. His dedication to world peace through transcendental meditation, his uncompromising work, his dedication to the art life, the fact that he never sold out, he was always true to who he was, had allowed David Lynch to evolve into something like the counterculture Mr. Rogers. During the COVID pandemic, it was starting the day with David Lynch that made everyone feel normal.
Good morning. It's September 30, 2020, and it's a Wednesday. Here in LA, very clear, very still right now, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 21 Celsius. Okay, this is what I've heard, and I'll relay to you. The thorns on the rose bush right now are big, and there are many of them, and they're sharp. These are the poisonous thorns of negativity. But the rose is so much bigger. It's huge and beautiful. This is the rose of positivity. And this is the rose of our future. And it is huge and it is beautiful. Right now, the thorns of negativity are making their last desperate stand. But soon they're going to wither and fall away. They're going to rot and disappear. So don't despair. Great times are coming for the United States and for the whole world family. Should be going up to around 98 degrees Fahrenheit this afternoon, 37 Celsius, and we should be enjoying, once again, along with the toasty heat, those beautiful blue skies and golden sunshine. Everyone, have a great day.
In the September 2024 issue of Sight and Sound magazine, in an interview primarily aimed at promoting his new album, Cellophane Memories, that he had recorded with singer Krista Bell, Lynch was asked if, after the long isolation of COVID, the idea of going back onto a film set felt daunting. He remarked, almost casually, "No, I'll tell you, I've gotten emphysema from smoking for so long of a time, and so I'm homebound, whether I like it or not. I can't go out, and I can only walk a short distance before I'm out of oxygen." In a follow-up article in People, Lynch proclaimed that he could barely walk across a room. Everybody thought David Lynch had retired and was dying. And so he took to Twitter to clarify. On August 5th, 2024, he posted, "Ladies and gentlemen, yes, I have emphysema from many years of smoking. I have to say that I enjoyed smoking very much, and I do love tobacco, the smell of it, lighting cigarettes on fire, smoking them. But there is a price to pay for this enjoyment, and the price for me is emphysema. I have now quit smoking for over 2 years. Recently I had many tests, and the good news is that I am in excellent shape, except for the emphysema. I am filled with happiness, and I will never retire. And I want you all to know that I really appreciate your concern. Love, David." Only David Lynch could make a warning that cigarettes will kill you sound like a commercial for how great they are. Sadly, not half a year later, in January of 2025, a combination of extreme drought conditions, unseasonably high heat, a massive windstorm, and an aging power grid caused a series of wildfires to ravage Los Angeles. In extreme high winds, older power lines and electric transformers spark and even explode, dropping flames onto the bone-dry forest floor. The resulting fire is then whipped up by the high winds, spreading like, you get it. The Palisades Fire, which began on January 7th, 2025, leveled what was known as the Pacific Palisades. The Eaton Fire, which began the same day, ravaged the city of Altadena. The Hearst Fire burned a swath north through Sylmar. If you were in one of the areas that was not on fire, you had your bags packed by the door waiting for the evacuation order. And if you went outside without a mask, you would be coughing your guts out inside of about a minute. On January 8th, a fire erupted right smack dab in the center of the Hollywood Hills. the Runyon Fire. The only fire that investigators feel relatively sure was actually arson. That burned 60 acres just north of Hollywood Boulevard. I had to evacuate, and so did David Lynch. By all accounts, he was not happy having to leave his home. The hustle and the bustle of evacuation and relocation put a heavy strain on his fragile health. And on January 16th, while meditating, David Lynch passed from this life. People all over the world mourned his death, but in LA, where he was such a presence, it was a huge blow. The city was on fire, and now David Lynch was gone. The Bob's Big Boy in Toluca Lake, where Lynch famously went every day for coffee and a milkshake, became an impromptu meeting place for people who wanted to feel some sort of connection. The statue of Bob out front became a fittingly weird shrine. It still is.
Maharishi has two missions in life: enlightenment of the individuals and peace on earth. The whole secret is that field within, unbounded field, the transcendent, a home of total knowledge, modern science's unified field, an eternal field. Infinite it is, unbounded it is, immortal, immutable, always and forever been there. Why don't people know about this? Why aren't people learning to transcend every day and experiencing this? Because when you experience it, you infuse some of that, you grow in that, negativity lifts away, all positive grows. It's such a blessing for the human being. So many problems in this world. This solves the problems. It's an ocean of solutions within us. People get happy. They don't want to kill each other. The key to peace on earth is there. It's just unbelievable. This has got to happen, and it's got to happen soon. Look at the world we live in now. And it doesn't have to be this way.
Bob's Big Boy makes great hamburgers and lots of good things to eat. It's fun, it's friends, it's laughs, it's time to have yourself a treat. And the place to go is Bob's, you know. You can have lots of fun. 'Cause Bob's loves kids and kids love Bob. Just ask anyone. You know, Bob's loves kids and kids love Bob. Just ask anyone.
Other podcasts reach for the sky. Dana Goldbound.
We barely try.
This has been the Dana Gould Hour, brought to you by the Internet. Music by Andy Paley with Jake Posner behind the board. Produced by Jeff Fox. Graphic design and web production by Spencer Hunt and Segan Friend. Sound editing and post-production by Jalinda Palmer and Joe Napolitano. Tom Kenny speaking.
I'm a DJ, I'm a DJ, I'm a person, I'm a person, I'm a singer, I love to sing and DJ. Boom! Peace out! Peace out! You want me? Peace out! Boom.